Well, it's really completely amazing to see this dress standing here, just looking absolutely fantastic, because the first time I saw this was actually folded up, crumpled up in a trunk upstairs in Dunollie House.
Did you ever think it would end up in an exhibition like this?
Actually, I didn't, because it was in such a state, and what you can't do with the dress of this age and this quality is just take the iron to it, because it's not going to work out.
Yes, it's too delicate.
But the story behind all this, I suppose, is that last year the National Museums of Scotland asked if they could have a loan of this dress for their wild and majestic exhibition about, the glorious Highland revival in Scotland, and really the growth of tartan as a fashion.
It shone in the exhibition like a pearl, because a lot of the exhibition was menswear, and there were several other ladies' dresses, but of course this really stood out. Another thing that was very eye-catching about the dress is, of course, the beetle wing trim, which you can see trimming the bodice here and, of course, down at the hem. One misconception we need to dispel straight away is that no beetles were harmed in the making of this dress. The beetles aren't killed to obtain the wings, they fall off the beetle naturally.
One of the things that's absolutely fabulous about the whole dress ensemble, is the sash. But we don't actually know anything about the sash.
Yes, because I think what's interesting is the fact it isn't actually MacDougall tartan. It's perhaps it hasn't been specially woven for Mary Jane. It's rather perhaps, well, you could use the word generic, but in other words, it's been bought as a sort of, as you say, Highland fantasy type tartan. And again, it's quite likely to have been sourced from London, where the silk was being produced. And it was in line with Sir Walter Scott's choreography for the event, in which he dictated what everybody was to wear. And the ladies were only just to wear a touch of tartan. They weren't allowed to dress head to toe or to wear an actual tartan gown. You can see here on the trimming on the cuff of the little puffed sleeve. You can see it just in view there under the bobinette of the sleeve. And she actually has matching slippers. So they must have commissioned some proper MacDougall tartan in silk, and this was used as a sleeve trimming and also to make these beautiful dancing slippers.
But also, we've got a whole bonnet which is lined with more or less, I think, the same tartan as that trim. So it is a time of, in some ways, very plain underdresses, like a basic dress, but it was a fantastic time to be an accessorizer. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves.
We are a bit.
Here, though, because we've got this dress and we haven't yet started talking about
the wearer.
The wearer.
The lucky lady who wore this beautiful dress.
And I suppose if we're going to talk about the wearer, what we have to do is rewind the story a little bit further back to the beginning. Into that later 18th century family came Louisa Maxwell. And she was much younger than her husband.
Yes, she was half his age. She was only 20 and he was 40. So
that's right. And certainly his friends all said, this seems like a good idea now, but wait till you've got a clutch of daughters. Well, he had a clutch of daughters.
Yes, it was half a score.
Half a score of daughters.
He did indeed.
The ones we really know about are Anne and Mary Jane. And they were beginning to get into their 20s. But Louisa basically said, you want these girls off your hands? Well, you're going to have to get out into the carrying stream where there are going to be men. Now, what does this remind you of?
Pride and Prejudice.
Does it not?
It certainly does. This is a highly fashionable dress. It would have been, literally the latest trend for going out into society. The columnar shape is still prevailing. That's from the turn of the century. This was an influence of classicism, like the columnar shapes, influence of ancient Greece and Rome, and a move away from the stiff shape and bone stays and so on of the 18th century. So this lift to a higher than natural waistline. Though they were still wearing stays underneath. There could be a short stay which are known as Regency stays, or there was also long stays. This dress is made of bobbinet lace, which is machine-made lace. This had come in as from about 1808. It was an innovation, and it brought the cost down dramatically, so it became incredibly popular. And it's almost one of the sort of signs of the Regency, was this great enjoyment, this lavish use of this newly affordable lace. As from 1815, we're also seeing another change in fashion. It's that gowns were self-trimmed, and there was an abundance of trimmings, especially the likes of this rouleau trimming down here. These are literally tubes of satin cut on the bias, and literally the tubes pulled inside out, and then it's used to make these loops and figures, which are abundantly trimming the lower hem of this. And we also have these lappets coming down here. Now we can see they're stitched in, they are meant to come down. Very much want to make a big entrance into society.
So next to this black husband catcher dress, we've got the most extraordinary cape that when we first came across this cloak, we actually couldn't date it at all.
Yes, so this is made of it's made of raw silk. It's an absolutely luscious, beautiful evening cape. The fluffy tassels here are actually made of raw silk as well, and there's a sort of self stripe woven in, so there's like a satin stripe through it. It would have been right almost floor length.
It's real luxury, isn't it? I mean, there's no way you could describe this as a need item.
No, this is for a big evening out.
Yeah,
I mean, the height of elegance, the hair dressed and the jewellery, and it's part of that.
So far we've been talking about daughters, the daughter of the house, and the importance of the girls marrying, because of course if you didn't marry then you ended up looking after your parents, and it was the fate of a lot of daughters if they didn't manage to get married and get out of the house, get their own house. But the other way, of course, that women came into a family was when they married in. And the great woman, I suppose, of the 19th century at Dunollie was Sophie Timmins. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that Mary Jane met her husband down in Cheltenham, and John met his wife in Cheltenham. I think it was a very whirlwind courtship, and she was young. She was younger than John, but they very quickly plighted their troth, and then she came up to Dunollie.
Here's one of Sophie's absolutely gorgeous gowns. It's an 1830s gown. We can tell by this, the way the sleeves are constructed. They're like big puffed sleeves, a very wide silhouette across here. We think probably earlier 1830s, the waist still a little bit high. This is literally straight out of a fashion plate. Which you look at many, and it's beautiful to see a dress like this in real life. It's a confection. She was a fashionable, elegant lady. And
yes, didn't her mother-in-law at one point say that she sits in the drawing room like a china doll?
And doesn't even bother with the servants, just leave them to it.
So she was obviously a tremendous character. She was bright. She was left in charge of the affairs when John went to sea.
Yes, she had to get involved in things like, for example, dealing with a failed potato crop when the potato blight blew over from Ireland, and she had the foresight to get all the potatoes harvested before they rotted and spread out to dry and sprinkled with lime or something like that to dry them out. So, and she seemed to also know what was going on. She knew about blocked drains in Oban and things like that. So she was practical as well. So
not in that dress though.
Not unblocking a drain in this. No, definitely not.
Sophie certainly went shopping, and this is the most extraordinary fashion garment that I think perhaps in the collection for its complete nonsense.
This is a style which came back in to some extent in the 1890s, but in the later iteration the sleeves puffed out from the shoulder. This gave a great width out to the side here. I've even seen fashion plates with the gowns that even had embellishments to make them stick out even further, and sometimes in tiers. This gave a woman a very particular silhouette. There's a very unique look to the 1830s. Quite often have a really big wide bonnet. these wide sleeves, and the petticoat would it would be quite short. It could even stop above the ankle bone, and little flat shoes. This gave the women an almost childish silhouette or doll-like.
Where would somebody get something like this made? Because it doesn't look like a garment that you would make yourself at home.
Absolutely not. The workmanship in this is exquisite. And so she's obviously had this has been commissioned for her. There was a huge dressmaking trade in Edinburgh. Some of it was very much aimed at the gentry, but she may have had it made for her down in Cheltenham.
We've got a rather unexpected addition to this exhibition of costume here, and this is at the request of Lyra. Lyra is the youngest grandchild of the current chief, and her passion is conservation of animals, and in particular she's very, very focused on the pangolin. Now, the pangolin and Lyra are part of the Extinction Rebellion movement. We have what is a stuffed pangolin here. Now there is a really major discussion about that. And then you come above here and you look at the juxtaposition of this extraordinarily extravagant piece of dress. Who knows what conditions that silk was produced in? Who knows how much people were paid when they were making this? This is 200 years ago, but it could be now. So, beautiful dresses in this room, but surely the queen of all of the dresses is this wedding dress,
yes,
which
indeed.
It dates to 1842, and if we wind the story back to the courtship, it was young Sophie. We've met Sophie Senior, who is in her gorgeous pink dress, who came up from Cheltenham and married John and settled herself into Dunollie. And their daughter Sophie was the beauty of the family. There's no doubt about it. And she caught the eye of Sir Angus Campbell of Dunstaffnage, known as the Bart. But there's this sad backstory with Sophie.
Yes, there is a tragic aspect to this. She was, in some ways, you're looking at this beautiful dress, but she was a tragic bride.
Yes.
It's very much a Victorian story.
Very much Victorian, because she was ill even before the wedding. She
had a delicate constitution.
There's long been a sort of, what was wrong with Sophie, but actually there's one clue. She referred in one of her own letters to somebody who had tuberculosis, and she said, they have something of my complaint. So it looks like it was TB, and as often with consumption patients, the health went up and down. But, the Bart was ill in the run-up to the wedding. She was well at that point, but they did get married. Now, the day was quite something, wasn't it?
It was described beautifully as a very highland scene in which all the servants were treated as well. A spread was laid out for them in what's now our gift shop, but at that time there was a dairy and a laundry. There was highland dancing outside. The carriage came up to the house after the wedding, and the wedding took place in the house, not in a church, which seems to be more normal in those days. Then the happy couple went away in the carriage.
But what spectacle she must have made when
as
she
a beautiful
presented
Highland
those
bride.
dress. Yes,
with the castle as a backdrop.
Yes.
So.
When we put this dress onto this form with a crinoline under it, one of our volunteers said, and now we can see Sophie in it.
Yes, and we do now. With the proper underpinnings, we can see how the dress would have looked, and we can see her shape, and we can picture her wearing it. Of course, it would have been worn with this beautiful long veil, very much in the style of Queen Victoria, who had been married 12 years previously to Sophie, but the influence was still there, and like the Queen, she wore an orange blossom headdress with her veil.
The thing that you can't avoid seeing, and you can really see it with the veil, with the black background there, is that it is lace. It's just fabulous.
It's a lavish use of lace. It's a generous use of lace. And this was Limerick lace that was sourced from Dublin, where the family had some connections, and that's put onto this beautiful fitted satin bodice with a bobinette overlay. And it's a classic mid-19th century shape, with a round bell shape supported by a crinoline and a very fitted waist. But this time corsets had come in and replaced stays, so it's a classic hourglass shape. So she would have been a beautiful bride.
Lucky Sophie is married to her Bart, and they're in Dunstaffnage, being the county family. But older Sophie mum, has two daughters at home, and we have Elizabeth, who was known as Kitty, who lived a really long life and was still on the go in 1924, I think, when she died. And we've also got Louisa, who was quite a well-known figure around Oban, and she was the founder of St John's School, very, very active in the community. So this continued to be a house of women, and women actually who were still interested in dressing for themselves. And I think that's quite interesting because, you know, we've talked about how the black dress was a dress to catch a husband. Louisa and Kitty had really passed beyond the point when they were going to be catching a husband, and they were now companions for their mother. But these are probably their dresses.
So this is a beautiful ensemble. It's a two-piece. It's a tailored bodice and matching petticoat or skirt. It's got the beautiful flounced sleeves coming down like this, and also flounces down the front of the skirt, and it's covered in appliques. It's made of a beautiful stiff taffeta, which is also, the bodice is also lined. And you are seeing corseting now coming in, so the Regency silhouette's completely gone, and now we're in the mid-century, which is nipped in waist and, as I said, more of an hourglass silhouette. And this was, I mean, very much a day ensemble, so it's suitable for travelling.
The extraordinary thing about this dress is the purple that's in it, and we know that this can be dated to after 1866 because this is a chemical dye, and it was actually the very first chemical dye that was ever made. And, you know, we've seen some phenomenal colour in the dresses so far, particularly in the sash that went with the dress that was worn in 1822 by Mary Jane. But those astonishing colours were all natural. And here we have it. This is an absolutely height of fashion purple dress. But the reason we're showing it like this is because look at the purple right there.
Yes, it's very faded. Yes.
But you lift up the skirts and you get an idea and a sense of the
right absolute
gloriousness.
It's absolutely eye-popping under this.
It is.
Brilliant.
So to be wearing this dress would have been completely stunning. And I really like the thought of these two girls, Kitty and Louisa, who were unmarried, but they don't look like a pair of sad spinsters to me. So Flora, you're standing next to a Victorian dress, and we've got a much more complicated story with this, but what is the original origin of this dress, do you think?
This would be originally a mid-19th century dress. We can tell by the shaping of the bodice, and it's quite similar to some of the other gowns we have. It's this absolutely vibrant sapphire watered silk or silk moiré, with these beautifully trimmed sleeves here and the netting across the shoulders. But this is a dress with a difference. This is not, it's been changed, which is very typical throughout the ages, that the dresses would be made over. Dresses from an earlier period could be brought up to date, or it simply might be a case of make, do and mend.
But we have now moved actually into the 20th century in terms of the story, haven't we? And we've got here a row of beautiful women who are our 20th century, some of our 20th century women in the family.
Yes.
And in actual fact, the 20th century was a quiet time in Dunollie, but it was a very interesting time. And actually Dunollie was completely let out at one point. But the family did return in the first year of the First World War to live here. And we begin a whole completely different chapter of the 20th century. We didn't really even cross over much with the Edwardian household, although, of course, Alexander James and Colina, his wife, who came here, were very much Edwardians of their type. And they had 3 daughters. They had Colleen, Jean and Hope. And Colleen's here behind me.
The Maid of Lorne.
And that's where we come back to this story of this dress. Now, how does this Victorian dress, fit into the story of these 20th century women?
Well, this is a dress which has a little bit of a surprise, which is something we discovered. It's actually in here somewhere. I'll just pass this to you. Now, this was a very interesting discovery. We found this in the pocket of the dress, and it had been there since 1948.
Yep, the Argyllshire Gathering 1948. And it's the dance card. Mm-hmm. So the wearer of this dress had a full evening of dancing, and she was particularly booked with SJH. That was Stephen Hadfield and that would have been her husband. And that was Jean, who was the middle daughter. Let's just say that not everybody was going to be able to go into their attic and get a dress like this.
Yes, this glorious Victorian dress and make it over. It's a classic example of make, do and mend.
And do you want to turn this round and we can show exactly how we can be so sure that this is a make, do and mend?
So that's why the silhouette's changed, because it's been altered at the back. So the wearer's been a slightly larger size, and of course it's a 20th century silhouette now, so no more corsets. So it's been a more natural appearance.
But despite that, it would have still caused a lovely stir at the gathering, and I'm sure that she looked fantastic.
Yes, I'm sure she was definitely one of the belles of the ball.
Well, I don't know if we're going to be able to get absolutely everything into this exhibition, but this is like a sneak preview of something that may find its way in or maybe won't. But this is what Colina might have worn, and certainly they're so light, they could well have been worn in India.
So these are called shirt waists. It's basically a blouse which should be worn with a long fitted skirt and perhaps with a jacket over it. And these are from the early 1900s through into the 1910s.
But the Edwardian period, it was very short. This type of thing didn't last very long at all.
I think history sort of took over and the position of women changed. Obviously there'd been the suffragette movement and the First World War changed everything. And that was the end of long skirts and corseting, and it never came back.
So this, of course, is Colleen, absolutely beautiful portrait that was painted by her mother. And Colina, who went as the wife of Alexander James to India, was a fantastic artist. And we have some of the most beautiful portraits. And the attic here and also the house is full of her works. Colleen herself was also an extremely rounded person. And we can see here a kimono. And that gives a clue to her interest. She was actually a sinologist. She was a specialist in Chinese art and had a keen interest in it. This is, of course, a Japanese kimono. Colleen also became a wren during the war, and she was, by all accounts, a really strong character, a very, very interesting character, always very proud of her wren service. And also famously kept Pekingese dogs and bred Pekingese dogs, so there's also the Chinese as well. So she wasn't the only strong but quiet woman of that generation. Jean, her younger sister, who wore the beautiful dress, she was an absolutely wonderful archivist and writer, and she wrote Highland Postbag, which remains to this day the best record of any life at Dunollie. And a lot of this exhibition, in fact, I would go so far as to say none of this exhibition could have taken place without Highland Postbag, which has given us such a huge insight into the archives, because she transcribed virtually all of this period of these generations. The youngest of these three girls was Hope, and she is best known for the collection of social history that she built up. She was also very much the clan historian. And these three girls, between them, held the heritage of Dunollie absolutely fantastically throughout the 20th century before handing over to Morag, who is the current chief. Morag MacDougall Morley, you are the chief of Clan MacDougall, the second woman chief of the clan. And of course, this is a story all about the women of Dunollie. There are other generations too, aren't there? Other contemporary women and girls of Dunollie. So tell me about them.
Well, there's my daughter Fiona, and she has two daughters. She has Elka, who's 11, and Lyra, who's 9.
And they've been a little bit involved in this exhibition, haven't they? I mean, we've met Lyra before with the pangolin, but I know that Elka has also been working on something for the exhibition, which will be coming to us soon, and so has Fiona. So they have skills, and starting with Fiona, what is her particular interest and her skill?
Well, her particular interest is art. Sculptures with wires, really, and that's her speciality.
And Elka and Lyra, both artistic? They're drawers, aren't they? Drawers and makers.
They are both Yes, they are drawers, and they're very creative artistically. They never get bored because they are always creating something artistic.
What did you know about the art that was being produced by your grandmother and members of the family?
Well, my grandmother was, her art was displayed around the house here at Dunollie, and she did a lot when she was in Ceylon, and she would have Scottish scenery, little crofts, and flowers is another thing. She had some beautiful flower pictures which we still have displayed.
And actually the Colleen's portrait here has got tremendous flowers in that as well. Your portrait, now I think it would be no secret to anybody who knows you that you were a little bit reluctant to.
Yes, very reluctant to have I don't like my photograph taken, so therefore I didn't like a portrait. But I did sit for it.
And
yes.
Are you happy with it?
Yes, I am.
Yes,
really.
It's captured you very well. So, as chief, I mean, you've been chief for really quite a number of years now, and you have overseen a huge amount of change. Talk us through a little bit what has happened for your, because this is your home. I mean, it's your family's home, but it's changed.
The main change, I would say, was that because my other aunt, Hope, died, she left a museum, she left the basis of a museum, hence the work of setting up the museum and everything it involves has been combined with all the artefacts she collected throughout her life, plus certain items in Dunollie itself.
All around us there are these absolutely fantastic dresses. It's like a procession of the women of Dunollie, and they are all members of your family and your forebears. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, it's amazing to see the line of generation going down in this one room with what they wore. It's quite something, quite exceptional.